coming from their heritage in England, which believed that there were those who had more worth than others because of their ancestry or their royal blood or because of their status and their net worth, to say that everybody had the same level of equality was a radical idea. In fact, it was so radical, it caused a revolution. And the 56 signers of that document understood that if they lost that battle for which they had staked their very lives, it wasn't just their taxes would go up, it wasn't just that they would have to work a little harder, they knew that they would pay with their own blood, as would their families. They knew what they were putting on the line. I say to you that for those who believe that simply the overturning of Roe v. Wade settles the question, it does not. And as surely as we had to come to the point in this country where we amended our Constitution so that we declared that people of color were of equal worth as those of us who were in the majority, so we need to once again revisit the very essence of our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution and affirm with an amendment to the Constitution that life is sacred, it begins at conception, and that it should be the purpose and it should be within the power of government to do everything possible to protect that human life until its natural conclusion. That is why we cannot have 50 versions of right and wrong. Abraham Lincoln said over 100 years ago, if slavery isn't wrong, nothing is wrong. I think in our generation, we can well say that if the taking of an unborn innocent life is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, how could we expect God's future blessing on this country if we cannot simply come to the logical conclusion that every life He creates with the same equal intrinsic value and worth as another, and that last name, net worth, position, color, gender does not make one life worth more than another. Ability or disability does not make one life more or less than another. Position or its inconvenience to others does not make one life more or less valuable than another. And it is not because we are against something, it is because we are for something. And remember that the day that we can move those lines of definition of life to include the unborn, someday that line can be moved for you. And that's a dangerous position to be in. In this country, we face many challenging and great battles. The battle against Islamofascism is a real one. And it is naive to say that if we leave them alone, they'll just leave us alone, because that's not the way it works. They do want to destroy every last one of us, and never forget this. Anyone who would strap a bomb to the belly of his own child and detonate that bomb for his cause would more than willingly take the life of your child for that cause. This is a serious threat to us. And it's a threat not just to those of us in the United States, it's a threat to Israel, and it is a threat even to those Muslims who do not subscribe to the idea that through a radical, perverted sense of Islam, every person who does not move toward this establishment of a new caliphate should be utterly destroyed. And that's what Islamofascists truly believe. It's a threat to us. There are some domestic issues that are a threat to us. A tax system that chokes the life out of people who try to work. An education system that lets kids stay in a system for 13 years and burps them out of it without even the capacity to read, to write, to point the nation's capital on a map or make change from a $10 bill. A challenge of a healthcare system that is completely upside down and waits until people are catastrophically ill before it begins to deal with them, rather than focus on preventing the illness, rather than waiting until it's out of control and then trying to intervene. I mean, I could list a bunch of them. But quite frankly, the reason that I have come here tonight is not to address those issues, however important they may be, but it's to talk about that if we could be right on all those issues, about our taxation policy and regulation and litigation, if we could be right on energy alternatives, and if we could be right on our policy of spending, and if we could be right on how we deal with the domestic issues of health care and education, we still do not have the framework for a future we can live with. We don't have that until we understand that ultimately our nation rises or falls not by us tinkering with some policies within the context of our society, but our society rises or falls on whether or not we understand the culture of character and whether or not this nation has core values to which we are so committed that we, like our founding fathers, would rather die than we would to live without. They had that kind of commitment, and we had better have that kind of commitment. The purpose of our being on this planet, according to Jesus, is to be salt and to be light. Sometimes we forget that in the days of Jesus, when he spoke these words, there were no refrigerators, ice chests, and when the fish would come out of the Sea of Galilee, they would be brought ashore and instantly rubbed with masses of salt, because salt was the preservative of the day. And fish are a lot like Baptists. As soon as you get them out of water, they start spoiling real quickly. I'm a Baptist, I can say that. Some of you aren't Baptists, and you love saying it. I know that too, especially our Lutheran pastor down here on the front. He's just a waterless Baptist is all he is anyway. So. But brother, if I ever got you where I could baptize you, I'd hold you under till you quit bubbling. I know that much. We're told we're the salt of the earth. That means that when something is spoiling, we're to be there to keep it from spoiling. We miss that if we think that the purpose of a believer is to be really, really well behaved in church. Being well behaved in church is a fine thing. But we don't change the world by being behaved in church. We change the world when we're the salt, and that means we sometimes will irritate. And sometimes we will agitate. But we will preserve. And if the salt has lost its savor, it might as well be sand. It has no purpose. We are the light of the world. Jesus, when he spoke that, looking up along those cities that surrounded the Sea of Galilee, could see the lights on the hill. I've been there 9 times to Israel. I have always marveled at the incredible visual and stunning picture that one has on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, looking up at those cities at night and realizing that in those days even the candles and the lamps from those cities above would have been visible, piercing through the darkness. And Jesus could have said, "You are the light of the world." And he would say that a city, a light on a hill cannot be hidden. But if the light is under a cover, it has no value. Our problem today is we have way too many believers who believe that somehow they've been called into undercover work rather than to be the light of the world. I do not remember reading in the book of Galatians that timidity is a spiritual gift.